the morning after, the night before. These sort of extended next day thoughts videos becoming a bit of a staple of the BG channel. Hope you guys like them. Let's start this video by saying the good news seems to be that Lucas Browne is all okay. Positive messages coming from the Twitter of both Lucas Browne and Ricky Hatton indicating that the signs are positive with regards to Lucas Browne. Now, very, very pleased to hear that. Lucas Browne is someone who's a likeable individual, likeable fighter. The way he went down in this fight with Dillian Whyte was pretty chilling. I'm sure boxing fans all over the world were fearing the worst when he went down like that. And it's good news that it appears at this early stage that Lucas Browne is okay after that fight. So that's very, very good news. Slight concern that from a tweet on Lucas Browne's page, Browne seemed to be indicating that it was the reason for his poor performance was something to do with his eye. Let me just pull up the exact tweet so I can read it out to you guys. So Lucas Browne tweeted, and this is at about 7:30 this morning, I believe. Hi everyone, thanks very much for the love and support. It wasn't my night, and massive respect to Dillian Whyte for his performance. My eye was giving me trouble from the second, and you can't protect from what you can't see. I'm all good, and I will be back. Now for me, that tweet creates a few concerns, frankly. Creates a few concerns. First and foremost, I was one of many out there last night speculating that that was the last we would see of Lucas Browne in a professional boxing ring. He isn't getting any older. Sorry, let me rephrase that. He isn't getting any younger. And clearly that was a career low performance and a devastating knockout. And he took a lot of punches in that fight. You know, it's the kind of fight that can certainly shorten a career and potentially end a career for someone in their late 30s. So I'm a bit surprised that Lucas Browne is, suggesting by the tweet that he's going to be back. Obviously he doesn't appear to have had enough of the game based on what happened last night. And I do worry for him because he is a tough fella. He's a big guy, and fights like that where he takes that many punches could have real damaging effects on Lucas Browne's future, especially if he ends up getting iced and getting knocked out like he did again last night. So that was my first thought. The other thing, and this is a theme that we may touch on 2 or 3 times throughout the course of this extended next day thoughts video, is the delusions of fighters. Lucas Browne says, my eye was giving me trouble from the second, and you can't protect from what you can't see. Now, granted, Lucas Browne got a cut over the eye. Granted, that must have been very, very difficult and would not have helped. But to blame this, or to even suggest this cut was a reason for the performance of Lucas Browne, for me, is far-fetched. He came in truly horrendous physical condition. Even from the first round, you could see that all the speed was gone, all the snap was gone, and he was either far too old, far too inactive, far too heavy, or far too clean, to put in a kind of performance like he did against Ruslan Chagayev. The writing was on the wall for Lucas Browne from the first minute of the first round. You could see just how slow and laboured and ponderous he was. I appreciate that the blood into his eye from the cut couldn't have helped, but the guy put his hands down by his waist for the entire duration of the fight. It wasn't that he couldn't see the punches coming. It's that he was standing there throughout the whole course of the fight with his chin up in the air, no footwork, no upper body movement, no head movement. He was just standing there effectively asking Dillian Whyte to catch him in the chin. Not good. And for me, if Lucas Browne can talk himself into believing that what happened last night was the result of a cut, that would be an indication of severe delusion, and probably wouldn't be good for his future. Let's put it that way. I would hope that was the last we see of Lucas Browne, and I certainly don't want to see him in a high-level fight or a top 10 fight you know, off the back of that performance. Let's put it that way. As for Dillian Whyte's performance, you know, Whyte's performance seems to have split opinion. You've got those who are very impressed, saying that they want to see him face Deontay Wilder, and those who say that he was facing little more than a heavy bag in there in the shape of Lucas Browne, and as a result, you can't really give him any credit for the performance. My personal opinion is I'm somewhere between the two. I do think that Lucas Browne was so poor in there, so fragile and frail and slow in there, that it's kind of hard to work out where Dillian Whyte is at off the back of that. You know, essentially he beat someone who turned up in such horrendous condition that, you know, you can't really start saying that he's going to go on and beat the top guys in the world, because the test that they will present will just be so different. Having said all of that, even though he was against a very disappointing Lucas Browne, Dillian Whyte, for me, did show some improvements. You know, there was some improvements to his speed, particularly when he put combinations together. I thought there was improvements to his timing and his punch selection. And I actually think there was a little bit more snap and sparkle in his work and in his punches than I've seen in recent fights. So, despite the fact that I don't think you can anoint him as the next great heavyweight off the back of the performance, yeah, I do think he does deserve credit, and I do think what we saw last night probably does represent a peak performance from Dillian Whyte, so credit to him goes for that. He's still Dillian Whyte. He is still a bit wild, a bit open, a bit wide and scrappy. The construction of his punches are not always, you know, they don't always look technically right, let's put it that way. You know, but as I say, there were improvements there, and he looked pretty good. So I'm going to give him a level of credit for that. You know, Lucas Browne, I talked about it in my post-fight video, whether he'll go down as a fighter who never achieved what he could have done. You know, I think that's very, very possible. And I also think from a legacy perspective, unfortunately, that Ruslan Chagayev win is even further marred in controversy for my mind, because the Ruslan Chagayev Lucas Browne, who is the Lucas Browne who failed the performance-enhancing drug test, is just so different to the Lucas Browne who fought Rudenko, to the Lucas Browne who fought Dillian Whyte. You know, for me, that's not a good look. But anyway, perhaps enough said about that fight. Dillian Whyte goes on. I'd be interested in seeing him fight Deontay Wilder. I don't think he beats Deontay Wilder. I think Deontay Wilder would, you know, use range and be able to catch Dillian Whyte from long distance. I don't think defensively Dillian Whyte would have the tools necessary to deal with the offensive threat of a Deontay Wilder. But they're obviously two very engaging characters, and whilst Dillian Whyte does have his flaws, you know, whilst he isn't the greatest technician, you could say neither is Wilder, whilst he does have those flaws, he certainly has real attributes. You know, he's a big guy. He's a lot heavier set than Wilder. He's above average durability. He's got above average power, etc. And I think he could cause some problems, but I wouldn't be predicting the upset. So we'll see where he goes on from there. As for Lucas Browne, you know, as I say, if I was him, I'd be calling it a day, but we'll see where he next turns up. Anyway, all in all, I sat down last night to watch the boxing, and I thought it was going to be a really, really decent card. Sadly, a lot of the fights didn't quite catch fire in terms of the competitiveness we were hoping for. A number of quite early stoppages, but nevertheless, I will say that it was a decent card for Saturday night. You know, on the face of it, Dillian Whyte versus Lucas Browne was a competitive card. It was a competitive fight. Richardson versus Cardle. You know, suspected Lewis Richardson would be a big favourite in the fight, and he so turned out to be, but nevertheless, somewhat competitive. Frank Buglioni versus Callum Johnson was a 50-50 from a bookmaking perspective. So I, you know, was looking forward to last night's boxing, and I think it was a well put together card in general, and a good way to sort of whet the appetite for next week's action with obviously Joshua Parker, Price Povetkin, etc, etc. So let's talk about some of these undercard fights. Let's talk about Frank Buglioni versus Callum Johnson. Now, I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't give myself a little bit of a plug here. we do a weekly gambling video on Patreon for Patreon subscribers, where we have a bet of the week, and the bet of the week this week came in for the third week in a row. And the bet of the week was obviously Callum Johnson to beat Frank Buglioni. Now, we've already talked about the losing in boxing. Frank Buglioni and his camp, for me, are towards the top of the, the top of the list when it comes to the losing in boxing. I was talking about this back when he was with Pascal Collins, back in the day when he was with Pascal Collins. And I was saying that the losing in that camp, is second to none. You're seeing Buglioni going out there getting his head jabbed off by area title level operators, and you heard Pascal Collins saying, "Good round, Frank. That was a defensive masterclass." Ridiculous stuff. The truth is, despite all the hype around Frank Buglioni, and despite all the talk about Anthony Yard and stepping up to higher levels, etc., this is not a guy who has really performed at any level. He got knocked out by Sergei Kamitsky. Let's not forget that. He dropped a draw against Lee Markham. Lee Markham is like a below British title level operator. I remember his fight against Andrew Robinson. Andrew Robinson is another guy, decent fighter, don't get me wrong, but area title, English title level operator. He gave him all he could handle. Buglioni got away with the win there. Then he got really beaten by Fedor Chudinov, really beaten by Fedor Chudinov. Went life and death with Hosea Burton and managed let's put it this way. Hosea Burton snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in that fight. And then we've seen him labour against guys like Ricky Summers, Craig Richards, really, more sort of area English title level names for me. So up against Callum Johnson. Now, I'm not saying Callum Johnson's anything special, by the way, but up against someone with Callum Johnson who was, a more refined amateur with a bit of punching power. He just looked like someone who was slightly better than the usual area English title level that Buglioni puts on a very, very laboured, narrow win against. So it was a confident pick for me that Callum Johnson would beat Frank Buglioni. But even I couldn't have told you Callum Johnson was going to do it quite that easily. Buglioni comes out, he's open as hell, he's trading straight away, and he's stopped inside a round. Eddie Hearn was talking about the rematch. Gotta be honest, not something that I'm overly interested in. I know the fight didn't even really get going, but I just can't see Frank Buglioni beating Callum Johnson, to be honest. I saw an interview afterwards with Don Charles. Don Charles saying it was Callum Johnson's destiny to win the belt last night. That's just what you want to hear from your trainer. It's not like, "Oh, Frank, we need to go away, work on the jab, work on the defence." It's, "Oh, well, it's a destiny kind of thing. Let's just keep going and doing what we're normally doing. It was just his destiny tonight." For me, Frank Buglioni, is too late for him, unfortunately. I think he's had back-to-back trainers in Pascal Collins and Don Charles, and I've got to be honest, at no stage have I seen either of those trainers implement the necessary changes in Buglioni's game. I mean, these are relatively basic things that he's lacking. His defensive openness. I mean, the guy is just pleading to be hit. Anyone with a jab is going to cause him all sorts of bother. And the eagerness to trade and engage. All of these stuff needed to be ironed out 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's been missed. It's been missed. And I think it's probably too late for Frank Buglioni at this stage. He does get involved in entertaining fights. He is a big ticket seller, as I understand it. Maybe the Hosea Burton rematch would be a fight that people would be interested in. Can anyone really take Buglioni Yard seriously after this? Probably not. As for Callum Johnson, credit to him. He put in a good performance. He's a solid fighter. I don't think he's spectacular. He was talking world titles last night. I think, I don't look at him and see a world title fighter, if I'm honest. But I do think that he is possibly a little bit better than that sort of Frank Buglioni, Jose Burton, Ricky Summers mix. I do think he may be a little bit better above that. He's now British champion, Commonwealth title holder, maybe a Euro belt. He hasn't. I can imagine he hasn't earned a huge amount of money in this game. Maybe he would be inclined to take some of that Anthony Yarde money if it is available. If Yarde and Frank Warren were offering Callum Johnson 100k for a fight or more, perhaps Callum Johnson would be inclined to take that fight to try and get some decent funds back out of the sport. And yeah, who knows? Obviously, Yarde would start that fight as a substantial favourite, but that's a fight that I'd watch. That's a fight that I'd be interested in, and yeah, it would certainly be a very, very substantial step up for Anthony Yarde based on what he has done so far in his career. Let's put it that way. So credit goes to Callum Johnson. As for Frank Buglioni, can he come again? Yeah, but for me, the upside is that sort of mid-British English level, and I expect to see Frank Buglioni lose routinely if he faces anyone above British level. The floors are just too vast, and they've spent too long without addressing flaws. And when we're on the subject of not addressing flaws, and when we're on the subject of giving trainers a kicking, let's talk about Derek Chisora, another Don Charles fighter. Now, Derek Chisora is the classic example of a fighter who hasn't addressed his flaws. Think back to the Tyson Fury 1 fight. Think back to that Vitaly Klitschko loss. Think back to the Hellenius fight. Any one of us as boxing fans could have sat there with a pen and paper and wrote down a list of 5 things that Derek Chisora needs to improve on in order to have a bit more success. But unfortunately, at no point, similar to what I've seen with Frank Buglioni, at no point have I really seen Derek Chisora address the fundamental issues in his game. And part of that is the fighter's responsibility, part of that is the trainer's responsibility. I appreciate Chisora with his attributes. He's never going to be a Muhammad Ali dancer jabber type. But the way he swings in with those wide looping punches, every punch, there's no right hand that's just straight. Every right hand has to be, slow as hell. And in the first round in this fight, you see Chisora swing in wildly 3 or 4 times and actually get countered by the taxi driver he's fighting. Now, Derek Chisora has been throwing the overhand right, trying to hope that it lands on someone since about 2011. In this fight, it did land in the second round, and when it landed, he was able to take his opponent out. But the truth is, that punch will continue not to land against top-level fighters or Euro-level fighters, maybe even British-level fighters, because it comes from so far back, it's so slow, it's got such a loop on it, it's quite easy to read. And yeah, a better fighter with a better angle, better head movement, better footwork is just not going to get caught by a punch like that. And Chisora leaves himself so open to getting caught, when he's throwing those kind of punches. So it's the same old Derek Chisora. The fight, it was only 2 rounds, but the fight, for me, there wasn't too much to talk about in there. Chisora is still Chisora for what that's worth. And, there's no indication, yet again, that he is going to work on any of the flaws that have been shown in his game from the Ajit Kabayel fight, for example. So what we expect is Chisora to come back. We know he's good enough to beat journeyman opponents, but next time he faces anyone between that sort of Commonwealth Euro level, yet again, he will lose. Because the blueprint on how to beat Derek Chisora is so established. If you want to draw up a game plan to beat Derek Chisora, it must be one of the easiest game plans to draw up, because you can look at 4 or 5 or 6 opponents who've beaten him in relatively similar ways. So all you've got to do is look it up on YouTube and copy what they're doing. Look, obviously you need to have attributes, skills, etc. to be able to implement that. I'm not saying that anyone could go and beat Derek Chisora, but anyone at that sort of Euro level, I would pick to beat Chisora at this stage. Let's put it that way. Very much the case of same old, same old. What was more entertaining than the fight with Chisora, however, was the after-fight antics, bringing back good memories of Chisora versus David Haye. Chisora, I believe, said in an interview afterwards, don't mention my name again, or you will have to leave London. So bringing back memories of the old, we all remember some of the things that was said between Chisora and David Haye back when those two were kicking off. One thing I did find humorous was when he called Joe the Chihuahua Joyce, because he kind of, and to be fair, look, I mean, Joe Joyce is a fairly big man to be compared to a Chihuahua. I mean, I haven't seen too many 6'6", 18-stone Chihuahuas walking in the streets recently. But to be fair, he does kind of have this habit of following David Haye around, and David Haye being a complete mouthpiece for Joyce. I mean, you see this incident yesterday after the fight, proper WWE style antics, where Joe Joyce is the sort of massive, brooding, silent type, and his manager is doing all the talking for him. And you could see that with David Haye. David Haye properly, doing the talking for Joyce, and Joyce just kind of following David Haye around like a bit of a lapdog, or like a bit of a Chihuahua, if you want. I do think Joyce is a good fighter. I do think he beats the likes of a Chisora. I rate Joyce. I don't think he is the most charismatic. I don't think he's the most natural talker, and I don't think he's the most comfortable in situations like we saw ourselves last night. But it was entertaining nevertheless, culminating in Derek Chisora saying he wanted the following offer to fight Joe Joyce. If Joyce beats Chisora, he wants £1, as in Chisora's fee will be £1. If Chisora beats Joyce, Chisora wants David Haye's purse from the Tony Bellew fight. Now, obviously, this is entertainment. Obviously, this is WWE style antics. But Derek Chisora knows that that is a completely unrealistic offer that would never ever happen in a month of Sundays. It's just something that doesn't happen in boxing, and it's ridiculous. If Chisora wants to fight Joyce, they should agree an amount of money that they think is mutually acceptable. The offer should be put in front of him, and he should fight. Joe Joyce. And by the sound of it, Derek Chisora is holding out for a hell of a lot of money for this fight. It's unclear to me whether he wants to fight or not, because in the interview I saw with IFL TV, he appeared to sort of directly contradict himself. He said something like, if David Haye mentions my name again, he'll have to leave London with what will happen. Following it up by, hopefully the Joe Joyce fight can be got on. Chisora knows that David Haye is not going to go into that deal where he gambles effectively and offers to pay the Bellew purse if Joe Joyce loses. They just need to come to some sort of amount of money. But Chisora did add value to that fight last night, because having seen the post-fight antics, I'm sure more people than ever will be interested in seeing that fight between Joe Joyce and Derek Chisora, and potentially in doing what he did last night, Derek Chisora is making that a fight that's going to attract more attention, and therefore a fight that he can earn a little bit more money off. So maybe there's some method to his madness. Backstage, you see him tucking into a burger. He's gone and got a Five Guys immediately after the weigh-in, after the fight, should I say. He claimed, although I'm unclear if he was joking, that he has had five Guys burgers, double cheeseburgers. Now, look, I'm not going to say that, look, you've just had a fight, you've won, you can't treat yourself after it. But what I would say is Chisora's back out in what could be the last roll of the dice in his career in 6 weeks. He's just turned up to that fight. For me, still too heavy. Still too heavy. He's got another fight off in 6 weeks. I personally would want to see him straight away getting on the lettuce and trying to cut 10 or 15 pounds for the next 6 weeks. But, we talked constantly in this video about the delusions of boxers and not learning from their mistakes. Derek Chisora tucks in to 5 double cheeseburgers from Five Guys, getting himself in perfect condition for the fight of his life against Joe Joyce, if it is to happen. But anyway, enough about that. That will be an entertaining fight, and I certainly hope it is Joe Joyce. They're talking about Carlos Takam. I can't see that Takam fight happening. Takam will want real money to come over, and it will mean Chisora will have to take a hell of a lot less. And Chisora has made abundantly clear throughout several years now extracting more and more money from these events is really what he's looking to do. So, yeah, let's see what happens there. I think the Chisora Joe Joyce fight would be fun. I've done a video on it if you want to check it out. It's already up on the channel, you know, discussing how I think that fight would go. So please do check it out if that's of interest. But let's put that one to a side. What else is there to cover? What else is there to cover? Scott Cardle. Scott Cardle versus Richardson. You know, we've given a few trainers a bit of a kicking in this video. It's probably too easy just to jump on the bandwagon and give Joe Gallagher a kicking here. But what on earth was that? You know, I put a tweet out during this fight. Scott Cardle reminds me of a peak Iron Mike Tyson. Now, obviously, that was in jest. But Cardle has come out against a puncher. Bearing in mind, Cardle can't crack an egg. He's come out against a puncher. And from the first 10 seconds of the round, he's throwing haymakers, leaving himself completely square and open, asking to get hit, really. Asking to get hit. You know, chin up in the air, trading punches wildly, throwing 20, 30, 40 punch combinations. I was expecting Richardson to take him out in the first round when this was going on, because I thought he was leaving himself open. Cardle did make the end of the first round, but for me, he'd already punched himself out and left himself with very, very little left in order to go into that second round. And sure enough, Richardson wobbled him straight away. Cardle was obviously exhausted from his efforts in the first round, and when a fighter's that exhausted, they become a lot more fragile to these kind of punches. Richardson deserves credit. It was the biggest fight of his career. He took a very, very calm head. He looked like the veteran in there, not Cardle in the first round. He weathered that storm. He kept tight. He picked his spots. And when he needed to, he landed those power punches and he made them count. So, you know, credit goes to Lewis Richardson. Cardle, you know, a terrible, terrible, terrible tactical performance from Cardle. If I think of Cardle, I think of a guy who can move, who can fight on the back foot, who can try and pick punches. I don't think of a come forward barroom brawl merchant. And, you know, we saw why last night, because that just doesn't work for him. He doesn't have the attributes, he doesn't have the power for that kind of work. And you know, it was almost embarrassing, really, almost embarrassing what happened in there to him. Completely without logic, completely without thought. And once again, you're left asking yourself, what the hell was the game plan from Joe Gallagher? What else have I got down on the list? Let's talk about Jamie Cox just briefly, just because we're continuing this theme of delusion in boxing. You know, Jamie Cox, see him interviewed after this fight. He says, Groves wasn't better than me. You know, Groves didn't have better attributes than me. He just caught me with a shot. You know, fighters do this, and they need to find a reason to justify their defeats. They need to find you know, something to blame, so that in their mind that they can continue in the same vein. You know, Eubank says that he didn't lose the Billy Joe fight or the Groves fight. You know, you see Lucas Browne saying that he only got caught with that hit because of the eye injury. Yeah, it's the same with Jamie Cox. You know, Groves wasn't really better than him. It was just a lucky punch. You know. Oh yeah, I'm definitely 168 pounds. I couldn't make middleweight. You know, once again, an example of a fighter not addressing the fundamental issues with their game. You know, we all look to that Jamie Cox fight against George Groves. He performed with credit, don't get me wrong. But what would be the key takeaways from that fight? Jamie Cox is too open. He doesn't have the defensive capabilities. He's too wild. Oh, and by the way, he's too small. And clearly, 168 fighters are just going to outsize him 9 times out of 10. What he's taken from that is he's on the same level as George Groves. Groves isn't better than him, and 168 pounds is his weight class. Let's see how that works out for him. You know, his next fight is a very good fight against John Ryder, who's a much improved fighter. Now, Ryder, to be fair, is also a tiny guy at 168, and Ryder does not have the punching power of a George Groves. So it may be that Jamie Cox doesn't, you know, get found out in the next fight. You know, I need to have a big think about that one before I decide who I pick. But it may be that Jamie Cox doesn't get found out next time out. But you mark my words, next time he steps up a level again, you know, it doesn't even have to be towards that George Groves level. Maybe someone in between, you know, Groves and Euro level, etc. You know, expect Jamie Cox to meet a similar end how he met, you know, the canvas in the George Groves fight. Because, you know, when fighters just do not address what is going wrong in their games, what you see are situations like Derek Chisora and situations like Frank Buglioni, where nothing ever changes, and, you know, anyone can see how to beat these guys. A few words on the prospects. Chris Kongo, fighter I like, was keen to see him last night. He was up against an opponent who I hadn't seen before. The opponent was better than I expected. He was awkward, he was tricky, he was experienced. And, you know, Kongo showed maturity, he showed poise in there. And, you know, credit to him for that. Anthony Fowler, I put a tweet out last night and I was surprised it got more likes than I expected, which potentially is an indication I'm not the only one feeling this way. Maybe it's a bit harsh, but I just think Anthony Fowler is probably my least favourite of the current brand of prospects. You know, so open, so lacking in technique, too willing to trade, but at the same time you don't get like the end. For some reason, you know, despite the fact that he's open and he's trading, I don't get that entertainment factor from his fights. He doesn't strike me as an immediately engaging personality either. I just find it so hard to get stuck into his career and to get excited to see him fight again. You know, we'll have to see. My early thoughts on this is for someone with such an accomplished amateur pedigree and background, it is hard to believe how many technical flaws exist in his game. And, you know, it really, really does strike me as kind of odd that he got to the level he got to in the amateur game when that many gaping holes existed in his game. Now he's with Dave Colwell, so I'd have Dave Colwell a little bit above some of the other names of the, you know, some of the other names of trainers we've discussed in this video. But, you know, Colwell's had one or two nightmares over the years as well. And, you know, let's see how he does with addressing those defensive flaws and ironing them out. I was a little bit concerned that in the post-fight interview, when asked about Anthony Fowler's rawness, you know, Colwell seemed to indicate that he didn't think the performance in the ring was a terrible defensive performance from Fowler, and I don't think I was the only one who disagreed with him there. Anyway, we're rambling now. So that's 33 minutes on last night's boxing. A word on Canelo. So I haven't read the full specifics of the story. I do understand Canelo is on some sort of temporary suspension. Very, very bad look for boxing. So he's on some sort of temporary suspension till early to mid-April. And a decision will be made at a hearing, I think it's a Nevada state hearing, as to whether or not the Golovkin fight can go ahead. So this is a bit of a disaster, really, for both guys. They're both in training camp, they're both working away, and at this point, it's unclear whether the fight is even going to proceed, you know. And I'll give the Nevada State Commission a bit of credit for doing something here, because everyone else seems to be just turning a blind eye. But I'll give them real credit if they make a decision you know, that goes against Canelo when it gets to the hearing, because at the minute everyone in boxing seems to let Canelo's behaviour go completely unchallenged. Now, I'm not going to get into the tight details of the failed drug test, because at this point I haven't yet done the research. But what I will tell you is lots of people on line are indicating that he has now failed 2 drug tests as opposed to 1. And the suggestion is that in terms of the levels that he's tested positive for, he hasn't missed them by a millimetre. You know, he's missed them by a very, very, very substantial margin. So if that's the case, if we are talking about multiple failed drug tests, and if we are talking about, you know, if we are talking about levels way over what is the acceptable agreed level, my personal preference would be that the fight is cancelled at this stage. You know, I know it's a good fight. I know it would probably still be a good fight even if Canelo was on performance-enhancing drugs. I don't want to see it. I think it's a terrible look for boxing. I think not only is it a terrible look for boxing in terms of how open performance-enhancing drugs are becoming within the sport, but also how unequal the treatment is, and how, you know, a lot of fighters would get banned for performance-enhancing drugs, but if you're a Canelo, you know, people will come out and support you, and you know, your fights are allowed to continue as per normal. You know, I hope that doesn't happen. I hope the fight gets called off, and at this point, I'd rather not see it. From a fan perspective, from a spectacle perspective, it's lost a huge amount of luster for me. And you know, as for Canelo's career, as for the first fight, you have to question now how relevant the achievement was from Canelo to score that draw with Gennady Golovkin, and whether that performance is now tainted, which is very, very unfortunate. Anyway, I could probably go on for a lot longer, but I'm going to call it a day there. 35 minutes, extended next day thoughts. Give me your comments in the section below on anything I've said today. That could be on Frank Buglioni, that can be on Dillian, Whyte, Lucas, Browne, Scott Cardle. Tell me who you'd rather be trained by, Don Charles or Joe Gallagher. Let me know your thoughts on Canelo. Let me know your thoughts on Anthony Fowler. Whole host of topics to discuss, so leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed the video, please do take the time to hit the thumbs up button. Please do press subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for tuning in.